Nuovamente buonasera a tutte e a tutti. Comincio ricordando che è possibile seguire l'evento di questa sera in italiano utilizzando il QR code che avete sul volantino e collegandovi a Zoom. In basso c'è un'icona Interpretations e lì si può scegliere il canale italiano. So I switch to English and I welcome you to the second public event of the summer school organized by the Academy. Today's guest is ACHILLE MBEMBE, who is based in Johannesburg and among other things is also a regular guest at the Franklin Hope Institute for Humanities at Duke University. ACHILLE is also a regular guest at our summer school, so I am particularly glad to welcome him to Bologna, although only virtually tonight. The usual way to introduce ACHILLE MBEMBE would be to say that he is a major figure in post-colonial theory. But this would be too narrow and eventually misleading. ACHILLE is a highly original thinker. Over the last years, he made pioneering contributions to several fields of research, including African history and politics, race and racism, border and migration. He works across languages and is part of an emerging new strand of critical theory in the Francophone world. I would like to remind his ongoing and once again very original dialogue with Frantz Fanon that has been a key feature of his work in the last years. I will just mention 3 books by ACHILLE that are available in English. On the Post-Colony, that came out in 2001. The Critique of Black Reason, 2017, and Necropolitics, 2019. The title of the talk tonight is Technology and Eschatology, in a way, a kind of intriguing and elusive title. So I really look forward to listening to ACHILLE tonight. ACHILLE, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sandro. I wish, like many others, that we could be together as usual in Bologna at this time of the year. hopefully next year will be different. And thank you for your very kind introduction. What I would like to do tonight is to share with you, the audience, a set of observations concerning, as Sandro said, the relationship between technology, ecology, and eschatology. This is part of work I have been doing over the last few years, part of which is developed to some extent in my latest book called Brutalisme. It hasn't been translated in English yet. It is also part of the forthcoming La Communauté Terrestre, which hopefully will come out before the end of the year or early next year. And I have also touched upon this topic here and there, in particular in a latest piece published by Public Culture recently. It is called Futures of Life and Futures of Reason, as well as in another piece called Meditation on the Second Creation. This was published last year by eFlux, which is an electronic journal appearing in Germany. But the first set of observations or remarks I would like to put forward have to do with the epoch we live in, which for me can be characterized as one of technological escalation. But technological escalation is not the only hallmark of the beginning of the 21st century. Another hallmark of the new century, the unfolding century, is what I call the swing into animism. I would like to argue that coupled with technological escalation, the transformations of capitalism have led to a twofold excess. An excess of what the Greeks called pneuma. The Greek word pneuma means breath. So an excess of pneuma and an excess of artifacts, or if you want, the transformation of artifacts into pneuma. And it seems to me that nothing translates this excess better than the techno-digital universe that has become somewhat the double of our Earth and of our world. In fact, it is possible to go further and to argue that one of the most distinctive characteristics of contemporary humanity is to constantly traverse screens, to constantly be immersed in image machines that are at the same time dream machines. Significant is the fact that most of these images are animated. And because they are animated, they produce all kinds of illusions and fantasies. For instance, fantasies of self-generation, the idea that in fact we are the creators of ourselves, fantasies of self-aggrandizement, and even fantasies of self-enhancement. But above all, they enable these images and these dream machines, they enable new forms of presence, new forms of circulation, incarnation and reincarnation, to the point where not only technology has become theology, it has also become eschatology. This is all more so because in this new universe, it is not only possible to split oneself into two or many, or to exist in more than one place at a time, and in more than one body, or in more than one flesh. In fact, it is possible to have doubles, that is, other selves, a cross between the person's own physical body and the image of the person's body on the screen, just as it's happening as I speak. As I speak, I'm sitting here in Johannesburg at home, and I am also present in Bologna. So traversing screens has become, as we know, the primary activity of contemporary humanity. What it does is that it authorizes us to exit, so to say, bodily boundaries, and to plunge into all sorts of parallel worlds, to be present to ourselves while simultaneously keeping a distance from ourselves. So that's the first set of remarks I wanted to share in the form of, let's say, what we call in French, constat, a set of observations, if you want. But I want to extend this first set of remarks by highlighting the fact that when I refer to technological escalation and the swing into animism, what I really have in mind is the vast reconfiguration of the human and its relationship with the living world, which is unfolding in front of our own eyes. And in fact, this is what I have called, as I told you elsewhere, the second creation. By second creation, I mean the attempt to technologically capture the energy of the living world and to download it, or if you want to transfer its attributes, the attributes of the living world, to transfer it into artificial components, but not whatever artificial components. Artificial components endowed essentially with the characteristics of the human person. And these components are then called upon to operate as human doubles. So, while in the past, animism was considered a relic of the obscurantism of so-called primitive societies, now it is compatible with artificial intelligence. Animism is compatible with supercomputers, with nanorobots, artificial neutrons, RFID chips, and even telepathic brains. So it is as if the cyberneticization of the world, with that process of cyberneticization of the world, both the human and the divine were downloaded into a multitude of tech objects, interactive screens, and physical machines. And these objects have become genuine crucibles in which visions and beliefs, the contemporary metamorphoses of faith, are forged. And from this standpoint, it seems to me correct to argue that contemporary technological forms of dreaming are expressions of animism. But as I intimated, they also differ from it. If only in the sense that they are governed by the principle of artifice, whereas ancestral animism, in any case in its African form, was governed by that of vital forces. So the distinction between, on the one hand, the principle of artifice, and on the other, the principle of vital force. And in fact, in African forms of animism, neither body nor life existed without air, without water, without a common ground, a common earth, if you want. Life, body, and consequently the human, were fundamentally open to air and to breath, to water, to fire, to dust and to wind, to trees and to their vegetations, to animals, and more broadly to the nocturnal world. By which I'm suggesting that everything was alive. It was alive at the intersection of languages. And this essential porosity was what made for its essential fragility. In any case, it was thought that the human adventure on Earth was played out in the reality of air and breath, and this could only last if a place was made for the regeneration of vital cycles. So, in short, life consisted in assembling together absolutely everything. It was a matter of composition and not excessiveness, which is a key element of the now. Now, let me move to a third set of comments. Because indeed it can be argued that technological escalation as such is not new. And this is true. But the the pace of advancement has clearly accelerated in recent decades. Nowadays, when we search for things, we use Google. When we buy things, we use Amazon. Google and Amazon have become like the environment for the conduct of most of our activities. Of course, there are other entities. I mentioned these two because they come up to mind easily. Now, the fact is that the conduct of these activities is done in ways that entrench these entities' position in the market. But it is also done in ways that entrench their positions in our own experiences of everyday life. And that is pretty new. In other words, we now exist in an everyday shaped and facilitated by these entities. And this is not all. We are now, more than ever before, ruled by the market. And in that sense, the market has not only become a totality, it has become our core moral subjective experience. But so has technology. So both the market and technology now set the rules and procedures according to which we are obliged to live together as a collective body within new planetary limits, as evidenced by the Anthropocene. And this we see in the multiplication of the digital ecosystems, which put together nowadays form what is increasingly known as platform capitalism, of which I would like to say three things. First, these platforms can be defined as distinct infrastructural ecosystems, and as such, they are experienced, as I just argued, as everyday environments. So for instance, to catch a ride, we use Uber. To keep in touch or to construct attachments, we use Facebook or Instagram. And these ecosystems provide the infrastructure for the conduct of late modern life. Now, to be sure, Uber, Amazon, Google are not exactly the same kind of platform. In fact, there are three broad types of platforms according to those who have studied this matter. Those who have studied distinguish, for instance, between the service platform, such as Uber, the goods platform, for example, Amazon, and the information platform, which is exemplified, of course, by Google. So these are three different entities, but the argument I want to make is that they have a number of things in common. I would like to highlight three such common properties. First, what unites them is the way that they capture value. They capture it from the transmissions and interactions of digital media and technologies. I mentioned the capture of value. I should add the capture of data. every time we shop, we are producing data as a market commodity. So as users, we are integral components in the platform's integrated infrastructure. We might not know it, or we might not think about it, but we are put to work for the circulation of data. Second, common to these three kinds of platforms is the fact that they are all, if you want, multi-sided markets, not just business to consumer or business to business, but user to user too. Third, they are not only channels for communication, but they also actively compel, they construct, they configure the way that users, data, and commodities are in motion. I want to highlight that circulatory dimension, the fact that they are on the move or in motion. I want to highlight it because key to the operation of platform capitalism is the mobilization of data. And the mobilization of data has become an essential part of the circulation of capital. But I want to go a bit further and argue that, in fact, data themselves are mobile. They are not only mobile, they are also fleeting, and yet their effects are lasting. In fact, data are constructed for movement. They are constructed for movement, and Sandro has done work on these or similar issues at a time when we see the emergence of two forms of logistics. A form of logistics for movement, but also a form of logistics for immobilization. The immobilization of those bodies that are deemed superfluous. So it's not enough to account for the way that data move. We must also understand that the most important configuration of data mobility is the achievement of scale, of speed, of agility, as put forward very remarkably by D. Beer in his book published a few years ago, which is called The Data Gaze. A book in which he makes the point that data platforms are at their most profitable and most efficient when, first of all, they are handling large amounts of data, and second, when large amounts of data move quickly. So the question of motion and the question of speed. So I wanted to share all those comments and observations as not a prelude to, but as a part of a broader interrogation, which I want to open up now, a broader interrogation on technological futurism. And that's what I'm going to dwell upon now. So all that I shared with you is actually going on, by which I mean that technology is impacting many domains of our existence. I didn't mention areas such as gene editing tools, promising designer babies. I didn't mention the fact that we are spending our lives mediated more by information media than ever before. I should now add the fact that a set of beliefs nowadays underlie much of technological culture, key among which is the belief that reality is informational. Human beings are nothing but information, and hence can be manipulated by our desires. A point studied recently by Shoshana Zuboff in her book, the title of which I can't remember now. But what I would really like to insist upon is the fact that the last, I would say, 2 centuries of technological development have gone hand in hand with cultural representations of that development. Cultural representations in the form of technological futurism. And it is this question of technological futurism, of the possibilities of technology, that I would now like to examine. But let me start with by highlighting a few key points. The first is the extent to which utopian thinking has been a key dimension of technological imagination over the past 200 years or so. Reviewing the history of this utopian thinking, I think, helps to reveal the close relationship between technology and religion in general, and more specifically, technology and or as eschatology. So that's the first point I want to highlight. The second point has to do with the concept of the future, or of futurism. We talk about technological futurism. What do we mean by the future or by futurism? A concept, futurism, which, as we know, has deeply marked Western culture. Now, the German theologian Jürgen Moltmann, in a book published long ago, which made a huge impact beyond theology as a discipline, the book was called The Crucified God. Moltmann makes a distinction between 2 conceptions of the future prevalent in Western thought. And I thought I should rely on Moltmann's distinction. Moltmann distinguishes between the future viewed as entirely and solely driven by what precedes it, and the future as a radical openness to the arrival of things, and not solely entirely the product of what has come before. Moltmann makes the point according to which the future as a radical openness takes form and shape in context of faith. Have to believe it. when the people seem to be at their wits' end, all their power, all their strength, all their ability to effect real change is completely impossible. So the future seems impossible given those circumstances, and yet the hope for something that is beyond all possibilities is nurtured, and unforeseen interventions do happen. So in this radical concept of the future, if you want, history gets interrupted by something that is either external to nature or internal to it. Speak about nature, one can also think in terms of creation, society, and so forth and so on. The point is that the future in this sense is akin to a narrative that represents an interruption of the narrative, a disruption of the environment or conditions of the story itself. That is what Moltmann means by the radically unforeseen future. I would like to bring in this debate another author whose name is Michael Burdett, who wrote recently a very interesting book called Eschatology and the Technological Future, who, the author, looks into the thinking and beliefs of key transhumanist figures such as Ray Kurzweil, Martin Rees, Nick Bostrom. He looks into their thinking only to find that ultimately all three, these are key figures, are in agreement on at least 3 points. They are in agreement on the overriding importance of the question of the future. They are in agreement on the malleability of humanity through both biological and technological evolution. And they are in agreement in the belief that human salvation is possible, and that technology is its privileged mediation. And in so doing, they have triggered a number of contemporary narratives of the technological imagination, which overlap very deeply with religion, or at least they overlap thematically on salvation, on questions such as the overcoming of death through technology, issues such as transcendence in this case meaning the surpassing of human limitations, and they overlap on the question of transitioning into someone or something entirely beyond the human. Now, one has to keep in mind the fact that there exists an enduring legacy of both utopian and eschatological narratives in the Western history of human storytelling. Because when you look into the humanist tradition, or what is taken as such, it is easy to realize the extent to which this tradition, in fact, has been responsible for many of these eschatological tales. And it has also been responsible, I would argue, for the most recent transformation or secularization. So the long process of secularization of themes and motifs which early on found their origins in theology, or as I'm saying, eschatology. So I think it's correct to say that speculations on future technologies have appropriated the tradition of eschatology and have secularized it. In fact, that is one of the points Michael Burdett makes at length in his Eschatology and the Technological Future. So this secularization of the eschatological, we see it at work in a number of cases or areas, such as artificial intelligence, such as molecular nanotechnology, such as biotechnologies. And here the belief, the faith, in fact, is that new technological advancements in biotechnology, in nanotechnology, in genetic engineering offer the possibility of redesigning human nature, of completely transcending the limitations of human physicality, of correcting, if you want, nature's unfortunate mistakes, and underlying this belief, this faith, are a number of perennial human aspirations. The aspiration that there will be a time when humans will no longer be controlled by nature. The staunch faith in the idea that technology will ultimately offer a path to immortality and disrupt or suspend, if you want, the secular temporalities of death itself. So, for instance, in cryonics, legally dead bodies, you will find them stored at liquid nitrogen temperatures in suspended animation, in the hope that future science may be able to reanimate them. This question of animation, animism, animation, reanimation. And since secular endings are final, there is no time after life, continuity as a secular project has had to be constantly reimagined and reinscribed in other terms, to the point where the politics of suspension in the age of biotech is one such project involving the constant, the ongoing techno-scientific translation of life into time, or rather of the translation of chronically incomplete lifetimes into promise-bearing forms of future life. That's one example of the ongoing connections between technology and eschatology. Another example is the belief that human reason is rather limited and that we need to outsource it to the technological realm by creating artificial general intelligence. But there are many other instances of such beliefs. Belief that in order to prevent the extinction of human civilization and in order to secure our survival, human beings might need to exist in a digital realm, for instance. And this existence in the digital realm, known otherwise as cyber immortality, is seen by many as the final telos of human existence, the integration of humanity within the technological sphere. That is our telos. And in this case, the ambition is to scan a mental state and the wider neurological network to which it belongs and copy it onto a digital device. I don't know how many of you have read the work by Sandberg and Bostrom. It's called whole brain emulation. They describe this process quite at length. The idea, in short, is to take a particular brain, scan its structure in detail, construct a software model of it, a software model that is so faithful to the original that when run on appropriate hardware, it will behave in essentially the same way as the original. That is, in any case, the belief. So let me summarize all of this. All of this indicates one thing, and I'm now moving towards the end of the presentation. It indicates the extent to which humanity has been a constant, sometimes blind force in the history of what we should call the living world. The term in French is le vivant. I think the best translation in English is the living world. Now, to achieve its project of universal domination once and for all, humankind did imagine that all it had to do was harness the force of water, wind, metals, fuels, radioactive materials, believe that salvation on earth was to be achieved through the machine. So as a result, we have sought to relentlessly liberate ourselves from natural and organic environments, instead of consciously making room for them. And having decided to chart a Dionysian course in our history, we are now struggling to understand the difference between the beginning and the end. Technological futurism has therefore of late been interpreted within the long history of the matter-spirit interaction, which is so central to Western metaphysics. Because in Western metaphysics, this interaction between matter on the one hand and spirit on the other, body and soul on the other, all such dichotomies, this interaction must find an endpoint at some point. And its endpoint is the abolition of nature. So the question of the end in Western metaphysics has been framed, among others, in terms of eschatology and apocalypse. At the start of the politics of eschatology, or for that matter, the politics of the apocalypse, is the belief in the final transformation of this living world. The belief is that this living world, just as the human in it, must reach at some point the apex of its evolution. And technology has been one way in which we have reimagined the landscape of possibilities of this final transformation of the living world. I want to highlight the extent to which this imagination has had an anthropocentric focus. Its radical focus on humanity and on the idea on the sacredness of humanity, the fact that we are not the same as nature. I want to highlight too the extent to which this imagination is in contrast with the current landscape of ecological eschatology, whose reflection is also about the final transformation of the living world. And here, I would like to end by making two openings. One opening in the direction of an author we seem to have forgotten, whose name is Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin published in those years 3 books which I think are likely to help us to reproblematize the question of the relationship between technology, ecology, and eschatology. The first is called The Divine Milieu. The second, Hymn of the Universe. And the third, Toward the Future. In those 3 books, de Chardin develops his eschatological visions, what he calls the Omega point. He also writes about his belief that, in fact, our nature, that is our inherent way of being, is rooted in the bowels of the earth, and therefore there is an organic unity of the universe. But now, how does he define nature? He defines nature as all that is not artificial, all that can be defined as organic. Now, the point is that explaining nature as organic and not artificial is inclusive of all creation, since he's speaking, de Chardin, from within the strictures of the theological discourse. So, the organic, nature as the organic, is inclusive of all creation, including the creation called human. He goes as far as to argue, in fact, that the human is the point of emergence in nature, but the point at which deep cosmic evolution culminates and declares itself. The existence of a biophysical world of which humans are parts and products, being indeed here at the center of his understanding of ecological eschatology, the fact of defining humanity constantly within nature, which implies the disposition to recognize what he calls vital analogies. So his eschatological statements about humanity are imbued with a sense of inclusivity toward the living world, the whole world, all the people of the world, to the point where redemption in his mind is fundamentally the redemption of the whole cosmos. I would like to open up onto this dimension of eschatological thinking, which we seem to have forgotten, as epitomized by Desjardins, a concept of ecological eschatology that takes seriously categories we used to separate, categories such as the earth, the world, the universe, the planet, the cosmos. All categories Desjardins uses interchangeably, although, of course, they have vastly different spatial implications. I want to highlight too the fact that his use of terms such as universe not only means the physical planets and atoms, it encompasses the metaphysical and spiritual aspects contained therein, such as consciousness. It encompasses the biological and spiritual energies contained in the universe. Then there is the organic nature of humankind, of which he speaks about at length, in the assumption that all reality will be unified, not only humanity. So that's the first opening. The second and last opening, I draw it from African forms of animism. And I want to end this lecture with the reference to those forms of animism. Forms of animism in which life is that which builds and rebuilds on the basis of the links that we are continually establishing between all figures of being. This being the case, in African forms of animism, what matters is not the end, be it in the form of eschatology or apocalypse. What matters is that room be made for all, and that no one be excluded. And this is understood to be then our common participation in energies and forces with which alliances are forged, but which exceed each of us taken individually. So the relationship between humans and the rest of the living world is thus founded not on a thirst for conquest and appropriation, but to the contrary, on an ethics of disappropriation, the aim of which is first and foremost to increase the reserves of life and to share in the primordial breath that unites and animates the community, in as much as the latter is composed of the dead, the living ancestors, the beings and things, animals, plants, objects, and spirits. And this being the case, one understands the importance in African forms of animism, the importance of the theme of repairing the world as an ongoing activity. Because the quality of exchange with the environment is one of the conditions for growth, reproduction, fertility, which in this sense is a matter not so much of natality as of metabolism in the broadest sense of the term. Metabolism in this case meaning the attempt to overcome the forces of entropy and degeneration. So here we have two ways indeed of interpreting the question of the debt of life. The debt of life not as some final transformation of the living world, but the debt of life as that which demands an expanded participation of living beings and artifacts in the action on matter and on bodies, which then allows for many ways of being a human or a thing in the living world, or in other terms, in the world of the living. That's the end of it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Achille, for this great talk. There are really many issues you touched upon that I would like to discuss with you, but I think it is better to give priority to the participants in the summer school who are following the event via Zoom. So please go ahead with questions and comments. Okay, then
Good evening. Thank you for. The mask. Sono vaccinato. Okay. Thank you for your intervention, and I would like to ask you a question with a refer to your work entitled The Aesthetics of Superfluidity, and in the terms of eschatology and technology. So, try to be very simple. We may affirm that forms of utopia and salvation are maybe arising through privileged infrastructure and salvific architecture. And now I'm referring to your work based in South Africa, and I have in mind the architectural Villaggio Mall in Doha, Qatar, that you may know. The question is, are we already experiencing an uneven spatial, and when I say spatial, I'm referring to architectural forms, an uneven spatial development in the terms of artificial or technical or maybe aesthetics eschatology? Thank you.
Look, I mean, first of all, thank you for your question. I'm sorry if I tend to respond to it at a high level of generality. It seems to me that, of course, these kind of investment of space, occupation of space, through such infrastructures, it responds, of course, to the contemporary transformations in capitalism in general. But those transformations themselves are increasingly underpinned by I would say the question of survival, or the belief, in particular, not only among those with means, also those without means, the increasing belief that we will survive by moving somewhere else, moving, for instance, onto another stage of biological evolution, acquiring, for instance, an artificial nervous system, or by immigrating to New Zealand, or immigrating to gated communities, all kinds of enclaves, which are part of the landscape of our world today, or even immigrating to some exoplanet. So, for instance, you see the myth of cosmic transplantation is back. All of this is happening in a context, I would say, in which the power politics of great nations today is itself, partially at least, underpinned by the dream of an automated organization of the world. Automated organization of the world, thanks to the manufacture of a new subject that is at once a physiological assemblage, a synthetic electronic assemblage, and a neurobiological assemblage. So it's part of the kind of techno-libertarianism, which is not unique to the West. I mean, China has also embraced it vertiginously. So, of course, without market democracy, but it has. And all of this at a time when another paradigm of government is gradually taking hold, which is government by capture, or government by the continuous extraction of life flows. And it seems to me, and I'll end there, that this form of government by capture is the work of mutant powers. It comes up against the reality of a history that can only be read and interpreted today on the scale of mineralogical, climatological, geological time. And this is the event of the times. Of course, we can read it sectorially if you want. But broadly speaking, that is the event. And I interpret what you put to me within that framework.
Thank you, Achille. Other questions?
Yeah, there is an online question, and Yuma is asking, when we talk about the commonalities of different forms of data capitalism, it's worthwhile also to take up their entanglements with the regimes of repressive biopolitics, or as you may say, necropolitics, particularly those forms of bio and necropolitics dispensed by the state formations. If so, does it complicate the eschatological vision of technology? Thank you.
Look, I mean, I agree with you that we have to extend the analysis to that level. Now, how can we do that in a way that is compelling is the issue. I think we can do that if we understand these platforms or digital capitalism, and Sandro is here, I'm sure he can help us. If we understand it, at least along 3 axes. And I try to refer to them in the talk. If we understand it as a digital ecosystem or environment, which would then force us, if I follow you, to look into what are the necropolitical dimensions of this digital ecosystem. We can also do it in a compelling manner if we understand digital capitalism as, of course, what it is, a system of transactions, and then the question would be, how is it that those transactions affect matters of life and matters of death? How can we define, for instance, what are called debts of life? And third, if we understand digital capitalism as an existential and experiential order or form of ordering individuals and ordering societies. So as such, I see it as a collection of processes, of sites, of moments in which technology mediates the structural tendencies of capitalism. Technology organizes and executes movements that are tailored to the structural needs of capital, and not necessarily of humans understood as life forces, if you wish. So that would be my answer. But as you see, it's more of a methodological answer than a substantive one.
Other questions from Zoom or from the audience here?
Good evening. So if I understand correctly, we have spoken about biological existence and about biological salvation and eschatology. But one of the promises of technology, if I'm not mistaken, was to also free humans from internal suffering, so from humiliation, from other kinds of things that are not strictly physical. So what can we say about technology and this other dimension?
Oh, we could say a lot. And you are right to, let's say, direct us towards, let's say, in that area. Let me think about this. And it seems to me that contemporary technologies, especially digital technologies, have achieved something pretty unprecedented in the history of the human. What is that something that is unprecedented? I think it has to do with the unconscious, what in psychoanalysis has for a long time been identified as the unconscious. The unconscious in the sense that the human subject is fundamentally divided, is fundamentally, if you want, self-conflicted. Self-conflicted and conflicted in relation to his or her belonging to either a community or a society or a family to start with. contemporary forms of the technological have opened the way to the imagination of a time when we will get rid of that self-conflictuality. And they have opened up the illusion, if you want, that we can get rid of the unconscious and let's say create a scene in which we are totally transparent to ourselves. And that radical transparency, the experience of that radical transparency would then allow us to become self-generating, as I was suggesting earlier on. We can create, we are our own creators. We are not only our own creators, we can revise who we are, edit ourselves, self-editing, self-curation, to the point where the other becomes ultimately unnecessary. We don't need the other. So this dream of self-sufficiency and self-transparency, it seems to me, has been made possible by new technologies to an extent we had not witnessed before. Now, can we call this liberation? I don't know. I'm not sure in any case. Whatever the case, what we are witnessing is a reconfiguration of the self, of the human, not only physiologically, but at other levels, such as neurobiological level, the synthetic level, and within the emergence of, I would argue, an entirely different human, which is not at all the human we imagined in the 18th century, for instance, the human endowed with reason, the human of democracy, and so forth and so on.
Thank you very much for this talk. I read your essay on the universal right to breath soon after the COVID-19 outbreak and Black Lives Matter, and I found it very inspiring and very helpful for reading our times. But now, listening to your talk today, it seems that the scenario has quickly changed towards a more pessimistic future. And I would like to ask you if you can see some traces, some footprints of the resistance of this claim of the universal right to breath in our contemporary social imaginary and social practice. I mean, if you can provide some example of resistance of the deeply organic nature of a common human nature, which was expressed in your concept of the right to breath. Thank you.
No, thank you for your question. I thought that at the end of the lecture, I mean, I opened up two lines of inquiry. One drawing from Teilhard de Chardin, which was rather optimistic, at least in my appreciation, and the other one that was drawing on an entirely different kind of archive, which I called African forms of animism. And that one was also, first of all, predicated on the idea of a continuing repair of the world, or in any case, the repair of the world as a continuing process, endless process. And it was also in contrast, it seemed to me, with the kind of incessant movement of destruction of beings and things, which is somewhat inherent to certain forms of the technological, at least in its modern and in any case contemporary form. So I want to highlight that as important interventions for those who are aiming at not only nurture new acts of resistance, but also those who are thinking about different modes of inhabiting the world at large and sharing it and redistributing it as a precondition for its sustainability. So those questions of the futures of life. And here I would like to insist once again on the potential that African forms of animism, or for that matter, I mean, the kinds of metaphysics one finds in Amazonia and other parts of the world, the insistence they put on themes of vital force, the potential for originality, fact of life, understood as a flow of energy, but more importantly, as a unique capacity for resonance, for resilience and creativity. I say all of this because when we, as we can see in Africa's ancient archives, for instance, all of this presupposes a certain ethics of dispensing with power. Dispensing with power, but also knowing how to forge an alliance with other vital forces, because this is the surest means of participating in the realization of the cosmos. The cosmos really understood in the sense de Chardin was talking about, which is to say, the surest means to contribute to the construction of a dwelling place, but a dwelling place that would be open to all, a place that would make room for one and all, and a place where, if you want, everyone would be called upon to become potential ancestors. Ancestors here in the sense of a segment in an uninterrupted chain of links. So if you want, that's the philosophical background that underpins this reflection. Now, you were asking for concrete examples of forms of resistance which would show how the universal right to breathe is, let's say, manifests itself. There are countless such examples. I'll give you some from the continent of Africa. You see, one thing strikes me when, I haven't been traveling for the last year and almost a year and a half because of what you know, because of COVID. I don't know how I will start traveling again. But when I used to travel in the continent, one thing was striking to me whenever I landed in Abidjan, Dakar, in every single major city in Africa. Wherever you land, the first thing that strikes you is the amount of people repairing something. Repairing a house, repairing a car, repairing a motorbike, repairing a shoe, repairing a pair of clothes, repairing a relationship through speech and language, repairing the soul, the psyche, through religious acts, rituals performed in the open or in private. So that activity of reparation, which is at the same time an activity of restitution, the two go together, are for me ways of breathing or repairing the body. You go to Dakar and you drive along the coastline from 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon until the sun goes down. You see multitudes of people repairing their bodies, trying to maintain them in good shape. So that ecology of repair, for me, can be interpreted as ecologies of breathing in the infinitesimal acts of everyday existence. And we haven't really paid attention to them as much as we could, as being at the same time forms of knowledge making, knowledge that could be mobilized and deployed in broader acts of, let's say, emancipation. So those are examples. They might not be obvious, which is in the nature of breathing. We can't see it. We can see its effects. But that's one set of considerations you allow me to put forward. So
thank you very much. It's almost 9 p.m. in Bologna. We have to close. I had plenty of questions and comments, but I'm sure we'll have soon another occasion to talk, hopefully in person. But thank you very much, Achille, for this great talk and for your generosity in the discussion. See you soon.
Thanks so much, Sandro, and thank you all for listening.